are live in a few places and on Instagram, on Twitter, and via StreamYard on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. Whoop! So if you are watching live on any of those places, please say hello. Tell me how you're doing. Tell me where you're tuning in from. Tell me what the weather's like where you are. Oops, let's just switch this Twitter thing a little bit. Too many phones, but it's all good. So tonight I'm going to talk about brain health because you know what? The fact is, without our brain, without our cognitive faculties, it's really hard to have a good life. So as humans, we're just kind of hung up on our brains. I mean, not that we really want to quote Woody Allen these days, but he did say in, I believe, Sleeper, he said, "Don't touch my brain. It's my second favorite organ." So, yeah, brains are important. So, let me introduce myself. My name is Hadassah Vitar. I'm a life coach, I'm a well-being advocate, and I'm here to talk with you about brains. Brains. No, we're not going to eat them. In fact, I know there's many cultures in which brains are a delicacy, but hello, thanks for joining. Our delicacy, but certainly bovine brains I wouldn't recommend eating because that is how Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease gets into humans from cows. But that's a whole different story. We're not talking about eating brains. We're talking about eating and doing other things to help our brains. So I picked up this amazing graphic. It didn't print very well, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to be following this structure. It's a graphic that talks about the different things that we need to do for cognitive well-being. And so this is going to be a series. I think tonight I'm just going to talk a little bit about each of those things, and then I'm going to do, as the weeks go on, I will do a series talking about each of those things in more depth. So our brain. What is our brain? I mean, everybody has one. If you're a human, you have a brain and functioning to different levels. Some people have issues with their brains, but everyone has a brain. And in fact, not having a brain is not compatible with life as a human. In fact, that's one of the things for which they will terminate a pregnancy is if the developing fetus has no brain. So it's a very important part of our system, our brains. So brains are so it's basically just it looks kind of like a fist, really. It's got a brain stem. It connects to everything else, and it's kind of interesting because the further forward you go in the brain, the more advanced and human-like it becomes. So basically, there's what we call our lizard brain, which is like right at the back, and which all lower, all of the lower animals share with us, the mammals and even and the amphibians, reptiles, and so on. And basically, that controls very basic things: fear, fight or flight. I am not a biologist or an expert on these things. I know that there's a thing called the amygdala, which if it gets too activated, we get scared and anxious. And then as you kind of move forward, there's the cerebral cortex, which is the covering of the brain and where we do a lot of our thinking, and this frontal lobe, where we do our, our logic, our executive function, and so on. And that's the part that I like to tease my kids about. Once they're 26, supposedly they finished developing their frontal lobe, and now they're responsible adults. We all have different levels of that, but I mean, it's something that's fun to think about what life is like when you're younger than 26 and when you're older. And some things are more fun when you're younger, and some things are actually a lot more fun when you're older. So that's a whole different stream of thought, and I would actually love to know what you think about it. So feel free to share. I'm kind of looking in different places because I've got two phones and a webcam all going here, so it's exciting. So the brain is extremely important. That's where we keep our memories. It's where we as like I said, our executive functioning. And what happens as we get older, or if we have some sort of traumatic brain injury, some things maybe don't work so well, and it immediately impacts people's quality of life if there's something going on with their brain. And so if you have, uh, like if you can't remember where you put your keys, which is something I think we all have sometimes, you know, you can't go anywhere until you found them. It's going to affect your quality of life, but it can be at a much more significant level. Like you can maybe have issues with mobility, issues with continence, being able to control your bowels or your bladder. These are really basic things that are part of human dignity. And um, people who can't deal with them obviously are still humans and worthy of dignity. But most people would prefer to be able to control their body function. So if you have issues with your brain that mean that you can't control your body functions, it's an extra level of difficulty in your life. I've just been listening to Judy Heuman's memoir, and she passed away recently, and quite amazing person. But she talks about the importance of autonomy, having personal assistance because she was a quadriplegic. She was in a wheelchair basically from the age of 2, and she had no ability to use her legs and limited mobility in her hands and arms. So it was difficult. And this was because she had polio. So that's another thing that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And that's actually something that is, well, I guess it is on my list. It's kind of obliquely under brain health in general. So just going back to this badly printed graphic. Next week I'll have a better one. I only just got it this afternoon. It's a whole story to get it, but anyway, I love it. So we have, I think, possibly on Twitter and Instagram, it's reversed. My apologies, but I think you can figure it out. So there's a brain in the middle, and it says multifaceted approach to cognitive wellness. So there's many things that affect that. I could mention there's brain health. So if your brain is damaged, if you've been in a car accident or you've been concussed too many times, they used to say about the late President Ford, Gerald Ford, that he played football too many times without a helmet, which was a very unkind thing to say. I imagine that was Henry Kissinger who said that, because it's totally the sort of thing he would say. But anyway, people have been concussed too many times. There was this whole thing with football players, with hockey players, they used to play without helmets, if you can imagine that. And there was this whole thing that they found, a CTE, I think it's called, anyway, some sort of brain damage that was absolutely a result of concussions. And at that time, like now, they have concussion protocol and so on. And if they think that somebody's hit his head too bad, they send him off the field or ice and put him in concussion protocol and observations and health and da-da-da. But at that time, it was like, oh, you got your bell rung, sit for a few minutes and then get back on the field. So people got brain damage. So brain health is an important thing. Might be a little controversial to say this here, but as I mentioned, Judith Heumann, for example, had polio, which in her case affected her mobility. But I mean, it's because it's a neurological disease. And we have a neurological disease running rampant right now. People might think it's a respiratory disease, but that's just how it spreads. It damages your brain, it damages your heart, it damages all sorts of important parts of your body. But right now I'm just talking about the brain. Let's just say that it's not a coincidence, in my opinion, that people are getting heart attacks left, right, and center. But that's a whole different story. But the brain fog, the cognitive issues are a really serious problem. There's people who cannot work because they cannot think. And that is quite aside for the whole question of whether they have the energy, if they're fatigued, if they can't get up, if they have issues with their mobility, but just the brain fog already is such a devastating and debilitating part of having this kind of neurological infection. So definitely something to talk about, that we want to avoid having that. Now, another thing that we'll be talking about is, of course, sleep. Sleep is a huge part of brain health. People who don't get enough sleep are causing themselves trouble, and I am guilty. I sometimes stay up too late and get up too early because I've got all sorts of things I want to do, and then I find that I'm actually not as effective. I might have done better to stay in bed rather than get up and work and maybe do things not the most optimal way. So we'll definitely be talking about the importance of sleep for brain health. What else we got? Food and nutrition, of course. There's, healthy food, adequate hydration. And of course, there's also a whole bunch of herbs and other supplements that are helpful for brain. I mean, most of us use caffeine. That's a very well-known supplement to get your brain going. I mean, a lot of people have difficulty functioning in the morning if they don't have their caffeine. And yeah, that of course is also connected with lack of sleep. But excuse me. What else we got here? Physical activity, of course, very important for maintaining brain health and every other kind of health that you've got going on in your body, but definitely brain health. Physical activity is really important. If you sit and stare at a TV, that's going to, well, the TV itself is part of the issue, but even just sitting, and again, if you're disabled and you can't exercise, this is not a judgment or a disqualification, but you will have to find other ways of keeping your brain on par if exercise is not something you can do. For most people, it's not that they can't, it's just that they don't make it a priority. People find time for things that are important to them. Sorry, I said it. Okay, stress management, extremely important. And again, it all connects with sleep, it connects with hormones, it connects with all the things. If you are chronically stressed, it is definitely going to affect your brain. Your brain health, I already mentioned. Social fitness is definitely going to be something to talk about because I already mentioned if you spend your time staring at a TV, that is going to affect your brain. There's been studies that show that longevity, for example, which is obviously correlated with how well your brain functions, is definitely correlated with social activities. So people who have good social networks are likely to live longer than people who are lonely and isolated. So it's an important thing to think about because, I mean, this whole brain thing, I mean, as we move forward, I mean, cognitive issues, dementia, and other problems with the brain are going to be one of the major health issues of our time moving forward. And so it's really important, especially if, like me, you're in your 60s or better, then you need to really be conscious of what's going on with your brain. So I think that covers the things that are on my fancy graphic. I said I will get it printed before next week because it doesn't look good, but it's all good. It will be fine. The information is there. And so that's my plan. I've got 6 different issues here on this graphic. So for the next 6 weeks or so, I mean, barring some really breaking news that requires me to talk about something else, that's probably what I'm going to be doing. So this was more like a general overview of all of these things, and then I will be each week going forward, I'll be talking in a little more depth about each of those areas because your brain is everything you got. Really, without your mind, without your brain, it's the most heartbreaking thing. We can lose most other organs and still be ourselves. But when we no longer know who we are, when we no longer know who our loved ones are, when we lose the memories of a lifetime, that is the scariest thing. I don't know about you, but for me, that is absolutely the scariest thing of getting older. I'm not too worried about mobility and things like that. We'll manage. We'll find ways. God forbid I end up in a wheelchair, I'll manage. There's millions of people in wheelchairs. They'll teach me how to do it. But if I come to the point where I no longer recognize my own children, then what's the point, right? And again, not to knock people's dignity, they deserve all the best. But it's something that, certainly for myself, I would like to avoid. And I imagine that if you're listening to this, you would also like to keep your marbles as long as you possibly can. So I see I'm reaching my 15-minute mark, so I am going to wind this down. Again, if you're watching the replay, thank you so much. I appreciate you. And wherever you're seeing this on any of my ridiculous number of platforms, somewhere on that platform, and it'll be different for each one, but for most it'll be link in bio. You'll find my link tree, which gives you access to all of my other socials from wherever you found me, and also connections to some of the other things that I do, like my Substack, just to mention a thing. So, and also you'll find links to some supplements that I recommend for brain health and other things. So, having said all of that, I will wish you a lovely, lovely evening or whatever time it is, wherever you are. And thank you again for watching. And I'll talk to you again in this format next week. You'll probably see reels and shorts popping up the rest of the time. But Wellbeing Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central, now daylight time, talking about lack of sleep, is where I'm going to be for the time being. So, thanks. Good night. Bye. Stop broadcast. And beep. How do I stop this one? Yes. And now. And broadcast.